She was lost for 2 years, then walked across America to find her soldier. Scene 1. The reunion. The hospital courtyard was quiet that morning, bathed in the soft golden light of a sun trying to break through a reluctant sky. Patients in wheelchairs dotted the lawn like scattered memories. Nurses passed slowly, pushing carts and speaking in low tones. And amid it all, a dog moved, limping slightly, dusty and worn, as if she had traveled 1,000 miles and then some. Bella. She had no collar, no leash, no human walking beside her. But she carried something far more powerful: memory. The kind that lives deep in the marrow of your bones and never lets go. For Bella, every step she took was guided by a scent long remembered, a voice echoing across time, a name that had once meant everything. Lucas. 2.5 years, that's how long it had been since she'd seen his face. 2.5 years of snow and hunger, of fear and open skies, of strangers, and hiding, and running. But something inside her, something she didn't understand but trusted, had kept pulling her forward, and now she was here. She limped into the courtyard unnoticed at first, her tail wagging slowly, uncertainly. Her fur was matted, and her ribs faintly showed beneath her skin, but her eyes burned bright with recognition, and then, "Come here, girl." A voice, familiar, so achingly familiar it stopped her in her tracks. She looked up. He was there, Lucas. At first, she didn't move. It was too much. Was this another dream, another mirage her heart conjured up to keep her going? But then he said her name. Bella? And it wasn't just the sound of it, it was how he said it, the disbelief, the hope. She ran, limped, threw herself forward with all the strength she had left. Bella! He dropped to his knees, arms open wide, eyes flooding with tears. "Oh my God, it's really you." She collapsed into him, pressing her body against his chest like she was trying to become part of him. Her tail thumped against the concrete. She licked his face feverishly, whining, half laughing, half crying in that way only dogs can. "Where have you been all this time?" Lucas whispered, stroking her head, his hands trembling. "You're hurt. What happened to you?" She didn't answer, of course, but she didn't need to. Everything she had endured, the mountains, the roads, the hunger, the storms, was written into her bones. And everything she had missed was written into this moment. Behind them, Olivia, Lucas's girlfriend, stood frozen, her hands over her mouth, tears spilling from her eyes. "Lucas, it's really her." Lucas nodded. He couldn't speak. He was holding her like he never wanted to let go. His mother stepped outside, catching sight of the reunion, and paused in stunned silence. "Bella?" And then all at once the pieces came together. The dog they'd mourned, the one they'd searched for, prayed for, cried for. She had come home. Lucas gently lifted Bella into his arms. "We need to get her to the vet," he said softly. "She's injured." "I'll get the car," Olivia replied, already moving. But even as they turned to go, the moment felt like magic, like the world had cracked open just long enough to let something impossible happen. 2.5 years. And she had found her way home. Bella rested her head against Lucas's chest, eyes closing, not out of exhaustion, but peace. She had carried the weight of hope for so long, and now she could finally lay it down. She was safe, she was home, and she was loved. Scene 2. The threat returns. The joy hadn't even settled when it was interrupted. Bella lay curled in Lucas's lap on the hospital bench, her body trembling slightly from fatigue, but there was a quiet peace in her eyes, a sense of rightness. Lucas hadn't stopped touching her, his fingers moving softly behind her ears, as if to reassure them both that this was real. The sound of approaching footsteps didn't register at first, but then a shadow fell over them. A uniform, a clipboard, and eyes that didn't look at Bella with kindness. "Lucas Raymond?" the officer asked, voice flat and formal. Lucas looked up slowly. "Yes?" The man didn't smile. "I'm with Animal Control. We received a report of a pit bull on federal property. That dog, he said, gesturing to Bella, needs to come with me. For a second, Lucas didn't respond. It was like the words didn't register, like the air had gone still. Bella, sensing the tension, lifted her head, eyes darting between the stranger and her boy. No, Lucas said, quietly but firmly, she's not going anywhere. The officer shifted his stance as if preparing for resistance. Sir, under Denver City Ordinance 867, possession of pit bulls within city limits is prohibited. We have reason to believe this animal fits that description. You are required by law to relinquish her. But this is federal property, Olivia interjected from behind. The VA hospital, it's not city jurisdiction. The officer's jaw tightened. Technically true, but the ordinance still applies when public safety is in question. She's not dangerous, Lucas snapped, rising to his feet, still holding Bella in his arms. She's been gone for 2.5 years, lost, hurt, alone, and she just found her way back to me. She's not a threat. She's family. Bella didn't growl. She didn't bark. She only leaned into Lucas, as if she could shield him with her weight. More uniforms arrived, 2 more officers standing a short distance away, hands resting on their belts. One of them, an older man with graying hair, spoke into his radio. It wasn't a standoff yet, but the tension had thickened, crawling like fog over the lawn. A crowd had begun to form. Nurses, veterans, staff, people who had watched the reunion just moments ago now stood in hushed disbelief, and slowly voices began to rise. That's his dog. She's harmless. She's a therapy animal. She's brought more comfort in 5 minutes than any medicine. Leave her alone! The officer, his name tag read Chuck, steeled himself. If any of you interfere, I'll have you arrested for obstruction. Lucas's mother stepped forward now, her voice calm but unyielding. You are not taking this dog. Not today. Chuck took a breath. Ma'am, I don't want trouble, but I'm here to enforce the law. Lucas adjusted his hold on Bella, his voice trembling but defiant. Then you'll have to go through all of us, because you're not laying a hand on her. There was silence for a beat. Then the older officer stepped forward, his gaze steady. Chuck, he said, you said Denver City Ordinance, but this isn't Denver, it's federal land. You don't have jurisdiction. Chuck blinked. What? You heard me. The VA hospital is not under city authority. It's protected by federal law, which means that ordinance doesn't apply here. So unless you want yourself reported for overreach, I suggest you step back. Chuck's face turned red. I'll be watching. If I see that dog leave the premises, I'll pull them over. The older officer didn't flinch. No, you won't. You're off the case. Hand in your radio. I'm pulling you from the field. Chuck opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. The shift in the crowd was unmistakable. The tide had turned. And just like that, he turned and walked away. Lucas dropped to his knees again, clutching Bella close, his breath shaky with relief. You're safe, he whispered. I won't let anyone take you. Not again. Olivia joined him, wrapping her arms around them both. We've got you, girl. You're home. Bella nestled into their arms, her heartbeat slowing, finally free. Scene 3. The law versus the heart. Inside the VA hospital, the atmosphere buzzed with tension long after the confrontation outside had passed. What had once been an emotional reunion between a boy and his dog had turned into a legal battleground, a debate between law and love. Lucas sat on the edge of the examination table in the small vet clinic attached to the hospital, Bella resting quietly at his feet. Her head lay gently across his shoe, her eyes half closed, tired but peaceful. A soft bandage wrapped around her front leg where old scars met new wounds. Every now and then she'd glance up at him with eyes full of quiet devotion, as if to say, I'm still here. I came back. Dr. Reynolds, the hospital's veterinary technician, crouched beside her, gently checking her stitches. She's underweight, dehydrated, exhausted, but no internal bleeding. She's lucky to be alive. Lucas nodded absently. His hands were clasped together in front of him, his fingers white-knuckled with tension. She walked hundreds of miles to get back to me. And now they want to take her away like she's a threat. She doesn't look like a pit bull to me, Dr. Reynolds said, glancing at Bella's gentle eyes. But you know how the law works. Breed-specific legislation doesn't always wait for facts. Lucas's voice cracked. She's not just some dog, she's my dog, she's part of my life. From the doorway, Olivia stepped inside, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She offered one to Lucas, who took it without a word.
"They're still outside," she said softly. "Reporters too. Word's spreading fast. Some people are saying you're harboring a dangerous animal."
Lucas gave a bitter laugh. Dangerous? She licked my face until I couldn't breathe and then fell asleep on my lap. That's their threat.
"I know," Olivia whispered, "but this might not stop here."
Lucas looked up at her, his eyes heavy. Then what do I do? Just hand her over? Let her be locked up in a shelter until someone decides she's not safe enough to live? There was silence in the room. Even Bella seemed to hold her breath. And then his mother entered, her expression calm but resolved. "We fought wars for freedom," she said simply, "for what's right. And now they want to punish a dog for surviving." Lucas swallowed hard. "She did everything right, Mom. She made it back. She followed her heart all the way home."
"I know," she said, and now it's our turn."
A knock at the door interrupted the moment. It was Captain Ruiz, the senior officer from earlier, the one who had shut down the aggressive Chuck outside. He stepped in carefully, hat in his hands, a softness in his eyes. "I'm not here to take her," he said quickly. I wanted to talk." Lucas rose slowly. "About what?" "About choices," Captain Ruiz replied. "You're not the only veteran around here, son. I've seen combat, I've lost friends, and I've seen people broken by things they can't name, but I've also seen what a dog can do for someone's soul." Lucas said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw began to soften. "This dog," Ruiz continued, "has already fought her own war, and it's not up to city law to punish her for surviving it. But that doesn't mean they won't try. So what happens now?" "That depends on you," Ruiz said. "You can take her home, but there's risk. The city might pursue charges if she's spotted in Denver, or—" He hesitated, then added, "We find another way." Lucas's brow furrowed. "What kind of way?" "There's a VA housing program just outside city limits," Ruiz said. "It's rural, quiet, and, most importantly, not under Denver jurisdiction. You'd qualify. You and Bella, you'd both be safe." Lucas knelt beside Bella, resting his forehead gently against hers. "Move my whole life?" he asked quietly. "She moved the world to get back to you," Olivia said softly behind him. "Maybe it's not running away. Maybe it's choosing peace." Lucas took a long breath. Bella gave his hand a small lick, as if casting her vote. "Okay," he said at last, we'll go, together." And just like that, the law bent. Not by breaking it, but by finding a path where heart and justice could walk side by side. Scene 4, a place to begin again. The road stretched ahead like a promise. Lucas drove in silence, one hand steady on the wheel, the other occasionally dropping to the passenger seat where Bella lay curled in a blanket, her eyes half open, breathing slow and steady. Her wounds had been cleaned, her belly partially full, and her body wrapped in warmth. But it was the look in her eyes that said the most. A look of trust, of quiet belief. She didn't know where they were going, only that Lucas was beside her. The sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains as they neared the edge of the city. The air smelled different here, cleaner, freer. No more sirens, no more cold stares or barking commands from strangers in uniform. Just open land, scattered trees, and the quiet rustle of wind through tall grass. At last, the VA transitional housing appeared in the distance, a collection of modest cabins surrounded by open field and the distant haze of pine-covered hills. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was safe. And for the first time in a long while, safe was more than enough. Lucas parked the truck and turned off the engine. The quiet was profound, like the earth itself was offering a moment of stillness. He turned to Bella, brushing a hand over her ear. "We made it, girl," he whispered. "Nobody's going to chase you here." Bella responded by pressing her nose to his wrist, then letting out a small, contented sigh. She didn't need grand gestures, just presence, just love. They were greeted by a woman named Marla, the housing coordinator, a former Marine with a warm voice and eyes that saw more than most. She didn't ask for papers or breed certifications. She just looked at Bella, then at Lucas, and smiled gently. "Looks like you both came a long way," she said. "We've got a cabin waiting, and a little space for her to run once she's healed." Lucas nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you." They settled into the cabin, small but clean, with a wood-burning stove, 2 twin beds, and a porch that faced the woods. Bella sniffed every corner, her tail moving slowly, unsure at first, then growing more confident with each step. She curled up near the fireplace like she'd always belonged there. That night, Lucas sat on the porch as the stars began to prick the sky, a cup of tea cooling in his hands. Inside, Bella slept, her body rising and falling with deep, healing breaths. He thought about everything that had brought them here, the fear, the fight, the resistance, the moment he nearly lost her again, the rules that said she didn't belong, and the people who had quietly, stubbornly said otherwise. His phone buzzed, a message from Olivia. "How's she doing?" Lucas stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "She's home. We both are." He tucked the phone away and leaned back in the chair, letting the quiet hold him. It was strange, this peace. After so many months of anger and exhaustion, it almost felt foreign. But Bella had brought him here. Somehow, her journey had mirrored his own. She had refused to give up, had chosen love over fear, and had trusted that someone, somewhere, would open a door. He looked through the window where she lay curled in a patch of moonlight, her ears twitching in a dream. "She saved me too," he murmured.
And maybe that was the real truth. This wasn't just about a dog returning to her owner. This was about 2 souls finding their way through darkness, through distance, through pain, and arriving at something like healing, like wholeness. Out here, beyond city lines and legal jargon, there were no ordinances, no labels, just breath, just earth, just a new beginning.
And for Lucas and Bella, that was everything. To be continued in Scene 5, When the World Watches. Let me know when you're ready for the next scene, Ngia. Bạn đã nói, bằng lời kể truyền giàu cảm xúc, khiến người đọc cảm thấy đồng cảm và kết nối. Hãy viết câu chuyện theo nội dung phân tích trên. Bắt đầu viết truyện theo nội dung phân cảnh 5 độ dài tối thiểu, không nhỏ hơn 650 từ bằng tiếng Anh, không soạn thảo trên Canvas. ChatGPT đã nói. Scene 9. When the world watches. Beat. The unseen becomes seen. Sometimes, the quietest stories echo the loudest. Word count. The sun had barely risen when the first knock came. Lucas was still half asleep, standing in the kitchen of the small cabin, pouring hot water over a tea bag, when Bella's soft woof pulled his attention to the front door. Her ears perked, not in alarm, but curiosity. He opened the door slowly, blinking against the morning light. A young woman stood there, bundled in a green parka, a press badge swinging from her neck, and a notepad in her hand. Behind her, a van idled by the roadside. Its side read, Channel 8 News, Community Spotlight. "Mr. Raymond?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I'm sorry to come unannounced. My name's Anna Kim. I was hoping you'd be willing to talk." "About Bella." Lucas hesitated. Anna noticed. "You don't have to say yes, but people are asking. Your story's being shared all over the state, and not just by dog lovers." Lucas glanced back into the cabin where Bella sat quietly, her head tilted, waiting. He sighed. "Give me 5 minutes." They sat outside under the porch awning, the wind brushing lightly across the field. Bella rested between Lucas's feet, head on her paws, calm and content. The camera was small, the microphone discreet. Anna didn't rush him. "I just want people to hear it from you," she said. "What happened? What she went through? What you went through?" Lucas looked into the distance for a moment, then spoke. "She was just a puppy when I got her. Found her behind a grocery store, skinny, covered in dirt, hiding behind a dumpster. I was coming out of a rough patch myself, fresh out of the service, trying to figure out who I was when the uniform wasn't on me anymore. He paused, voice lowering. Bella made it easier to breathe. He looked down at her, gently rubbing behind her ears. She understood something in me that I didn't have words for. And when she disappeared, Anna asked softly, "I thought I lost her forever. One minute she was in the backyard chasing leaves. The next, gone. No trace. I looked for months. Posters, shelters, online boards. People said I should let go, that it was just a dog." His voice caught, but she wasn't just anything. He took a deep breath, steadied himself. And then she came back, 2.5 years later, injured, hungry, but she remembered. She found me again. Anna was quiet for a moment, visibly moved. "And then the city tried to take her?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "They called her dangerous, said she looked like a pit bull, but anyone who knows her, anyone who's looked at her, knows that's not who she is. That law, it doesn't see hearts, it only sees labels." Bella shifted slightly, leaning into his boot. Her trust, absolute. "What do you want people to understand from this?" Anna asked. Lucas looked into the camera, eyes steady but soft. "That loyalty isn't bound by time or rules. That love, real love, isn't always neat or convenient, but it's worth fighting for. Bella crossed mountains to come home. The least I could do was stand between her and a law that doesn't know her name." Anna blinked away tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "People need to hear this." The story aired that night, and then it spread, faster than anyone expected. Comments flooded in, messages of support, offers to help. Strangers from across the country sent food, supplies, donations to shelters fighting breed-specific bans. Veterans reached out to say they, too, had been saved by a dog no one else understood. Bella became more than a dog. She became a symbol, not of defiance, but of return, of devotion, of quiet, relentless love. Lucas watched it all unfold with a strange mix of awe and disbelief. He never wanted fame, never sought attention. But somehow, in sharing what mattered most, he had helped others feel seen. And in return, he no longer felt alone. That night, as he lay on the porch with Bella curled beside him, he whispered into the dark, "You changed everything. You know that?" Bella didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her presence said it all. Scene 6. Echoes of the journey. It had been nearly a week since the news story aired, and Lucas was still trying to wrap his head around the ripple effect it created. Letters arrived daily, some handwritten in shaky script, others typed with the formality of people who had been waiting for years to say something real. Veterans spoke of loneliness. Widows shared memories of dogs long gone. Children drew pictures of Bella, tails wagging and hearts floating above her head. Lucas read every single one. Some made him smile, others made him cry, but all of them reminded him that Bella's journey hadn't just been for them, it had been with them. Her quiet, limping return had struck a chord deeper than he ever imagined. And still, there was one part of the journey he hadn't spoken aloud, not to Olivia, not to his mother, not even to himself. That night, the stars hung low and heavy in the sky, as if they too were leaning in to listen. Lucas sat by the fire pit outside the cabin, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. Bella lay beside him, her body now fuller, stronger, the scars beneath her fur less visible, but still there. He glanced down at her. "You remember that winter?" he said softly. "The first one, after you disappeared?" Bella looked up at the sound of his voice. "I used to leave your bed out on the porch, just in case. Even when it snowed, even when I knew deep down you weren't coming back. I still left it there." His voice wavered. "I kept hearing you at night, not barking or whining, just breathing like you were outside, just beyond the door. It used to drive me mad. I'd get up, check the porch, walk the streets. Every shadow looked like you. Every sound made my heart jump." Bella rested her head on his foot, her way of saying, "I know, I was trying too." Lucas reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, folded map, creased and worn from months of being handled. Red lines traced paths across state lines, circled towns, marked dead ends. It was the map he had drawn when he first started looking for her. "I followed every lead," he said, "slept in my truck, asked strangers, called every shelter in a 500-mile radius, and still nothing." He looked at her now, eyes glassy with emotion. "You were surviving while I was falling apart." The fire cracked softly between them. "I never asked what you went through," he murmured. "Where you slept, what you ate, who hurt you, what you saw." Bella didn't respond, but her gaze held his. Steady, grounding, unflinching. And then Lucas did something he hadn't done before. He began to talk, really talk. He told her about the night he gave up, how he'd packed the search maps away and let himself believe she was gone, how the guilt of moving on almost crushed him, how some mornings he'd wake up and reach for her out of habit, only to find air. And through it all, Bella listened, still, present. When he finally stopped talking, a silence wrapped around them, soft, forgiving.
"You don't have to carry it anymore," he whispered, placing a hand on her head. "You brought us both home."
She nudged his hand gently, then rested her head on his thigh and closed her eyes. It wasn't just her wounds that needed healing. It was his too. They stayed there long after the fire turned to embers, letting the quiet speak. And for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy with what was missing. It was full of what had finally been found. Scene 7. The Promise of Tomorrow. Spring came gently to the hills beyond the city. It didn't arrive with trumpet calls or dramatic sunbursts, but in quiet things. The bloom of tiny yellow flowers between cabin steps, the way the creek behind the woods began to murmur again after months of silence, and the softness in the wind that no longer carried the bite of winter. It had been nearly a month since Bella and Lucas found refuge in the VA housing community. Each day unfolded like a page being rewritten, not erased, but renewed. Bella walked with more strength now. The limp remained, subtle but permanent, a reminder of the miles she had braved alone. Yet her steps had a purpose again, a rhythm. She'd rise early with Lucas, stretch beneath the porch light and nudge his boot with her nose until he smiled and said, all right, coffee first, then your walk." Routine, once something Lucas avoided in the fog of his post-service life, had become an anchor, a blessing. And Bella, she was no longer just a survivor, she was a healer. Word had spread quietly through the community about the dog who had walked across states to return to her soldier, about how she had softened the haunted eyes of a man who rarely spoke and helped a widow stop sleeping with her bedroom door locked. Veterans who had once turned away from therapy now bent down to scratch Bella behind the ears. Some brought her biscuits, others just sat beside her, needing no words. She never judged, she never rushed. She simply stayed. One afternoon, Lucas was working in the small garden patch behind their cabin, trying to coax tomatoes from reluctant soil, when Marla approached. She carried a clipboard but wore her usual gentle smile. "Lucas," she said, "can I steal a minute?" "Sure," he replied, brushing soil from his hands. She crouched beside him, her voice low. "We've been talking with the VA's therapy coordinator. They want to expand the canine support program, use Bella's story, not as a mascot but as a symbol, as proof of what's possible." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "She's not a symbol to me."
"I know," Marla nodded. "She's family. And that's exactly why this matters."
He glanced across the yard where Bella was lying in a patch of sunlight, eyes closed, her body stretched out in complete trust. A young veteran sat nearby, watching her with the kind of reverence reserved for something sacred. Lucas felt something shift inside, a question he hadn't yet asked himself. What if this story wasn't just about being found, but about what comes after? Later that evening, Lucas and Bella sat on the front steps, the sky turning dusky pink. Olivia had driven up to visit, bringing sandwiches and that soft, calm presence Lucas had come to count on. As they ate, Lucas looked over at Bella. "They want her to be part of something bigger," he said. "Something official. Therapy training, visits to hospitals, VA centers. They think her story can open doors." Olivia smiled gently. "What do you think?" "I think maybe she's been doing that all along," he said quietly, without needing anyone's permission. They both looked at Bella, who was now sitting upright, watching a moth flutter through the air like it held all the secrets of the world. "She chose me once," Lucas added. "Maybe it's time I choose to do more than just keep her safe. Maybe we give this story a second chapter."
"You already have," Olivia said, her hand resting on his. "Every day you show up again, you're writing it."
Lucas didn't reply right away. He just sat with it. The idea that healing wasn't about forgetting the pain or outrunning the past. It was about taking what hurt and letting it become something that could help someone else breathe easier. As the stars began to dust the horizon, he leaned over and whispered, "What do you think, girl? Want to help a few more people find their way home?" Bella wagged her tail once, slow and steady. A yes, in the language only they understood. Scene 8. Full circle. Home is a journey. The morning of the event arrived with a quiet sense of wonder. Lucas stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt, one of the few formal pieces he owned, the same one he'd worn to his grandfather's funeral. It still fit, though it carried a few more years, a few more ghosts. He ran a hand through his hair, then glanced down at Bella. She sat beside him, head tilted, watching his every move like she always did, as if making sure he wouldn't disappear again. "You ready for this?" he asked. She blinked slowly, calm, steady, as if to say, "I've been ready for a long time." They stepped outside together into the early spring sun, the sky an endless wash of soft blue. The air was cool, fresh, with the scent of new growth and soil and blooming things. It felt like beginning again. The VA Community Center had been transformed. Folding chairs lined the open field behind the main building, flags gently waving in the breeze. Families, veterans, doctors and volunteers gathered, some with dogs at their side, others with quiet hearts and open hands. At the front stood a modest wooden platform where a microphone crackled gently. A banner overhead read, "Healing Together, Honoring the Journey Home." And beneath it, smaller letters, featuring Bella, companion, survivor, hero. Lucas wasn't used to being the center of attention. But as he walked up with Bella beside him, he didn't feel fear. He felt full. Not of pride exactly, but of something deeper. Belonging. Marla introduced him simply, her voice thick with affection. "This is Lucas, and this is Bella." They don't need much introduction because their story has already touched more hearts than we can count. Lucas stepped up to the mic, cleared his throat, and looked out at the crowd. He wasn't great with speeches, but he was good at truth. "She found me," he began. "That's where this story always starts and ends. I didn't go looking for a hero. I didn't know I needed saving, but she knew." He looked down at Bella, who sat calmly beside his leg, her eyes locked on his. "When I came back from service, I felt like pieces of me didn't fit anymore, like I was home in name but not in spirit. I didn't talk about it, didn't even understand it. And then one day I found her, this scrawny, scared pup, behind a grocery store dumpster. She looked like she didn't belong anywhere either." He paused, his voice thickening. "But we found each other, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees beyond the gathering.
"And then I lost her."
A hush fell over the crowd. "For over 2 years, I thought she was gone. I mourned her like I would a family member. And then out of nowhere, she came back, wounded, tired, but with the same eyes, the same heart." He looked up at the faces before him, many wet with tears. "I don't know how she found her way back. I just know she did. And in doing that, she reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Home isn't a place. It's a person. It's a connection. It's a promise you don't give up on. He bent down, cupped Bella's face gently in his hands. You kept that promise better than I ever could. Applause rose, slow at first, then swelling not out of celebration but reverence. For her, for the journey, for every silent battle fought in the dark. Afterward, people lined up not to shake Lucas's hand, but to kneel beside Bella, to pet her, to whisper thank yous. One veteran removed his service cap, placed it briefly on the ground before her, and touched her paw. Another woman, her voice shaking, said, I haven't smiled in months, but watching you, I remembered how. Lucas stood back and watched it all unfold. This moment, this miracle. His heart beat slow and steady, full of something he hadn't dared hope for in years.
Peace.
That night, back at the cabin, as twilight settled over the hills and the world exhaled, Lucas sat on the porch with Bella beside him. No crowds, no cameras, just the stars and the sound of her breathing. He looked at her, voice soft. You didn't just come home, Bella. You brought home with you. She rested her head against his knee, eyes closing. And in that silence where once there was grief and doubt, there was now only grace. They were no longer lost.
They were where they were always meant to be.
Together.